Hi everyone, this is James Roguski, and this video is a compilation of over 80 separate videos from people around the world who submitted these videos to the WHO during their video submission public comment period from September 9th to the 16th. And the WHO published these videos on September 29th and 30th. And this is a selection of all of the videos that were played. If you want to see all of the videos, including all of the videos from the foundations and non-government organizations and non-state actors, you can go to the WHO website and see all of the videos. I have edited out, and under fair use doctrine, I would like to comment on the videos that you're about to see. These appear to be videos that were made by regular people, not necessarily people who have money and foundations and organizations behind them. There might be a few people here that are associated with various groups, but I, for the most part, agree with nearly everything that is said by the people in the videos that you'll be watching. And there are far more videos than this that were submitted by people who did not want to submit to the WHO because the WHO required the submission of a personal ID card, a driver license, or a passport that people were told to hold up to the camera. And many people were very much turned off by that. So they submitted videos to screwthewho.com. And anyone who missed out on either, of those early submissions, you can absolutely post a video and say whatever it is you want about the WHO, the pandemic treaty, and the amendments to the international health regulations. Put the link in the comments on screwthewho.com, and I'll be happy to add it to the list of videos that have been submitted. And so please take the time to watch the videos that follow. These 80 or so individuals from around the world took the time to collect their thoughts and let the world know what they think about the WHO, their proposed pandemic treaty, and their very secretive at this point in time proposed amendments to the international health regulations. If you have any questions whatsoever, please feel free to contact me directly. My name is James Roguski, and the phone number is 310-619-3055. Enjoy the videos.
I'm Jeremy Williams from IPPO, the International Public Policy Observatory. Here at IPPO, we mobilize global knowledge to address the social impacts of COVID. And we need to learn the lessons of COVID, both for future pandemics and for the big global challenges which are already looming large. To meet these challenges, we need to understand two things: which interventions work and how do we define success. One of our key reflections from COVID is about the type of evidence that was used by governments. Policy was often informed by quite a narrow body of evidence, one dominated by epidemiology. In the heat of the initial response, this was perhaps understandable. However, not using evidence from other areas, such as mental health or economic impact, may have led to policies that lack balance or cohesion. We need to improve our systems for providing scientific advice to incorporate broader knowledge and experience. We also need to learn about the positive outcomes that were achieved by different actors working together. Finally, we need to remember that while policy happens at the national level, science itself is international, and that there is a lot to learn in sharing evidence and experiences across national boundaries.
Hello. The World Health Organization has an obligation to assess all the scientific evidence from all of the experts of human virology and epidemiology. I repeat, human virology. The WHO should never be informed by political or financial and technical and digital institutions or individuals. They are not experts on human health. Mandatory vaccines and lockdowns are not only a contravention of our human rights to freedom of movement and sovereignty of our bodies, they also do not protect the vulnerable, as the recent pandemic has proved. The public has the right to receive the correct information in order to make informed decisions and choices about their own bodies.
My name is Claire Hasty from Long COVID Support. We're a UK-based charity, but our international peer support group has 55,000 members in more than 100 countries and is growing all the time. One of the greatest lessons from the pandemic, I hope, will be the importance of listening to and working in partnership with patient organisations. We are a huge untapped resource. Many have professional as well as lived experience. Patients were the ones to identify, name and characterise long COVID, to hypothesise on what has been happening to our bodies and what might help alleviate some of our suffering. We were the ones to flag that people of all ages can be affected, that reinfection is possible even after vaccination, and that long COVID can develop even if people have recovered quickly from previous infection. And our collective minds have identified some of the complications that, if not caused by, certainly coincide with COVID. When researchers do not involve us, we see the wrong questions being asked in the wrong way. So we call for change at international, national, and local level. Nothing about us without us. Thank you.
My name is Ilona Kamieńska. I point out that negotiated treaty could open up dangerous opportunities for total digital control for societies and unlimited profit for pharmaceutical companies. Please reserve to the old definition of pandemic, which is characterized by high mortality in all age group and severe course. The level of infection should remain insignificant. I ask for public access to all activities and contracts signed by WHO. I believe that health management should be in the hands of country representatives, not pharmaceutical companies as WHO sponsors. Lockdowns should be independent decision of countries. The independence of all nations must be preserved. Open and uncensored dialogue must take place with respect to citizens and physicians who raise critical concern contrary to what is presented by the WHO. I know that a maximum of 90 seconds for presenting arguments is the against of honor of the citizens of an independent state. Thank you.
My name is Jürgen Müller. I'm a member of the Board of Directors of the association Kinderrechte Jetzt e.V. There is some probability that the virus originated in a laboratory. I demand an end to all gain-of-function projects worldwide. Stop accepting money and letting yourself be influenced by people and institutions who have no interest in the common good. If there is no problem, there is no need to act, and people can live a self-determined life without unnecessary coercive treatment. Thank you.
It's important that we have effective ways of listening to healthcare workers, most of those serving in the rural areas that serve the poorest. And this is where storytelling comes to play as an effective tool to communicate their challenges and successes and propose recommendations. When we listen to them, we ensure that their voices matter in decision-making, policy formulation, budgeting, and diplomacy. Thank you.
I support using methods from traditional Chinese medicine to help fight the COVID-19 pandemic. Since the pandemic broke out in early 2020, control of the disease within China has been very good. Apart from our system of governance and manner of dealing with emergencies, which is very different from other countries, part of that success is due to China's traditional medicine. It seems that nowadays many countries and territories outside of East Asia remain skeptical of the scientific nature and efficacy of traditional Chinese medicine, apart from acupuncture and Tui Na, which are more accepted. But in fact, traditional Chinese medicine is a comprehensive system just like Western medical science, and clinical practice has shown traditional treatments to be effective. I think traditional Chinese medicine can definitely help.
In Connecticut, for 28 years, I want to offer an alternative strategy, the one that was promoted by health professionals, Fauci, Birx, the CDC, and the WHO, regarding COVID-19. Medical experts' priorities are narrow, and this can cause unintended negative consequences. That's irreparable harm to the economy and the economic health of families and small business. As a quality improvement and optimization approach, we can minimize these negative consequences. Consider this data. The research in 2020 estimates that the mortality rate of COVID-19 is close to that of the seasonal flu, and we've never shut down for the seasonal flu. And 78% of all deaths are people over 65, and those who had more than 2 serious illnesses, such as hypertension and heart disease. Using the 80-20 rule, we can now conclude that we can prevent most deaths by protecting the most vulnerable. That's seniors with 2 or more illnesses. And those with a strong immune system don't have to worry. Knowing these facts and closing the entire economy is evil sabotage. Thinking you can stop a virus from spreading is illogical and arrogant. Let's help seniors, the most vulnerable, instead. Let everyone else be free. Now, I wrote this letter in April of 2020 to Chris Murphy, my senator. He did nothing. And if I can conclude this, certainly the smartest medical professionals can put this together unless they purposely did this to us.
Thomas Schwartz, Medicus Mundi International. We welcome your decision to go for a legally binding international instrument. So here's some recommendations. Focus your attention on this legally binding core of the new instrument. They are to create a genuine new piece of international law that, once signed and ratified, will make a difference beyond any aspirational statements. Focus negotiations on issues that are not yet adequately regulated. Doing so, extending the INB honeymoon is not an option. The most controversial issues are indeed the most relevant. Here are just a few of them. Some countries stated that the One Health approach is not yet sufficiently explored, while the human-animal ecology interface in which zoonoses have their origin indeed needs to be regulated. Do it in a way that respects the cultures, socioeconomic realities, and livelihoods of people and societies who depend on living with animals. This leads to the key principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, which is opposed by some countries. They say that it has not yet been implemented in the field of international health. So what? Do it now. It's the time. And dare to address the issue of human rights and define governments' obligations towards protecting the rights of their own people from being violated in the name of public health. Thanks for your attention.
I'm Baba Ayelabala from Public Services International. We must put health before wealth does. Suspension of intellectual property rights on vaccines and other pandemic products once a FEC is declared. Reform of the global health supply chain, removing obstacles to stockpiling of PPE as a preparedness strategy. International financial institutions' injection of resources without conditionalities to support emergency response in developing countries. Debt relief for vulnerable economies and debt cancellations for the most vulnerable ones. Multilateral economic institutions and private creditors expunging, liberalizing conditionalities to enhance developing countries' fiscal policy space for pandemic prevention and preparedness. Tax justice and illicit funds recovery to free resources for massive employment and provision of decent work for health workers. Finally, the international community must provide urgent, inclusive, and rights-based solutions to safeguard migrants during pandemics. Thank you.
My name is Casimir Platzer, and I'm the chairman of GastroSwiss, the Swiss Hospitality Association. Around 20,000 members, organized in 26 state associations, make us the largest hospitality employers association in Switzerland. GastroSwiss rejects a centralizing approach as key to the management of a pandemic. The management of a pandemic requires measures that take into account specific regional circumstances, such as population density, healthcare, state resources, and economic structures. We therefore considered the WHO's One Health approach and the standardization of measures that the WHO would like to define legally binding for the member states extremely problematic. We instead advocate a decentralized approach for the management of pandemics. There is a need for practical and individual solutions with a bottom-to-top approach instead of a mandatory measures from above. This promotes a multitude of ideas and a learning process that is favorable in fighting a pandemic. Thus, individual solutions are a significant help to mankind being able to contain and prevent infectious diseases more effectively. In addition, a decentralized approach makes it easier to involve social, economic, and political stakeholders. Thank you.
Hello, my name is DK Finn. I'm a Canadian. I speak on behalf of myself and don't represent any group or organization. I'd like to talk about what I believe should be addressed at the international level to better protect against future pandemics. There are 3 points to my response. Point number 1, our greatest asset against pandemics is an optimal, well-functioning immune system. Point number 2, unfortunately, from a lot of the research that I've done, I feel that the current anti-COVID-19 vaccines, specifically Pfizer's and Moderna's, are a threat to the immune systems of many who have taken them. Point number 3, I believe that internationally, we should address the unforeseen, undesirable consequences of Pfizer's and Moderna's vaccines. In conclusion, if we don't address these issues, we could be compromising the immune systems of billions of people, leaving them susceptible to a wide range of illnesses, diseases, and viral conditions. Thanks for listening to me.
I'm Nick Hudson, Chairman of PANDA, an organization concerned with policies relating to global social order, including public health. The World Health Organization records just 5 pandemics in the past century. Only 1918 influenza and COVID exceeded a single year of tuberculosis deaths. In terms of disease burden, major endemic infectious diseases such as malaria, TB, and HIV/AIDS cause vastly more and younger deaths, so equity demands greater resourcing for them. The COVID policy response, not used in previous pandemics, provoked an unprecedented rise in inequality. This particularly impacted low and middle income countries, whilst viral burden is overwhelmingly among the elderly and chronically ill in high income ones. Inequality and worsening health in LMIC populations demonstrates the dangers of prescriptive centralized policies and of failing to recognize vast heterogeneity of disease burden and community behavior. COVID demonstrated that pandemic preparedness is achieved by ensuring good health prior to viral spread, addressing basic nutrition and metabolic disease. Expanding a centralized pandemic preparedness bureaucracy contradicts principles of community-driven health, ignores diversity of need, and will drive increasing inequity, compounding that caused by the COVID response. Focus should instead be on sharing information, empowering communities to act on their own priorities.
All the WHO should be doing is recommending things to Canada, but Canada should be in charge of its own destiny and make their own choices.
My name is James Roguski, and I speak for myself. The first step to addressing future pandemics on an international basis would be to acknowledge the ongoing attempted genocide of the human population that is happening right now under the guise of the response to the COVID-19 pandemic as directed by the World Health Organization. The experimental and toxic gene therapy injections that have been masquerading as COVID-19 vaccines are causing a slaughter of epic proportions unlike anything the world has ever seen. The WHO, its 194 member nations, and its nearly 400 relevant stakeholders are either blind to this catastrophe or they are complicit in its cover-up. The first step to dealing with this genocide on an international basis is for police agencies around the world to immediately seize the assets, records, factories, and stockpiles of all of the corporations, organizations, and government agencies that are involved. We do not need a pandemic treaty, and we do not need amendments to the IHR. We need to rid the world of those who profit from pandemics. We need arrests, trials, and punishment of the criminals involved in this enormous racketeering scheme. We need to stop the shots, we need to stop the slaughter, and we need to abolish the World Health Organization.
My name is Dorota Pistos. I come from Poland. I'd like to object to the so-called new international instrument on pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response. I object to the negotiated treaty between the World Health Organization and the countries, including my country, Poland. The management of health, also during any pandemic, should be in hands of an independent Polish government and independent dedicated institutions in the country. But what is most important is that our health, the health of people, should be in our own hands, as every adult person knows what is best for them and their children. WHO is funded by corporations, famous billionaires, and their various foundations, all of which are also major players in the pharmaceutical and vaccine industries. The conflict of interest is obvious and unacceptable. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Malthouse. I'm the current president of the Canada Health Alliance, which is an organization in Canada with about 5,000 members. And we'd like to have a few words to say to the WHO regarding a couple of issues. One is the formation of a pandemic treaty, and the second is the amendments to the international regulations, health regulations, which we feel are being done in secret. So secret, in fact, that we don't even know the members that our country is sending to represent us. These two things are going to be legally binding, apparently, and take away the sovereignty for healthcare from many countries around the world, including Canada. And I know that 194 of the member nations are sending representatives to the WHO, and I feel that this is something which has been done behind closed doors, that we as a sovereign nation do not really, at least the citizens of this nation do not really have any say in what's going on behind those doors. And I think that the WHO should actually get out of our country, and I believe we should stop funding the WHO. The evidence that the WHO has done a terrible deal of harm since this pandemic for COVID began, the so-called pandemic, because in fact in Canada we did not have any increased deaths over that period of time, shows that the WHO really should keep their finger out of the pie, particularly out of Canada, and we do not.
I'm a PhD with a background in pharmacology, immunology, experimental pathology, and medical product development. As a top Johnson & Johnson scientist, I headed an R&D program prior to my own business of 26 years. International health agencies must learn from the failures of scientifically based policies that fractured communities and families and oversaw as many deaths pro rata after vaccination as before. Millions of lost lives and livelihoods might have been saved had repurposed drugs not been politicized and efforts been intensified to address comorbidities and inequities. The concealment of the never-before-approved experimental and gene therapy nature of the quasi-vaccines robbed humankind of its right to informed consent. The imposition of vaccine mandates justified by a charade of so-called full approval forced people to participate in a medical experiment. Contrary to WHO guidelines, the sequences of these gene therapies remained unpublished and closed to scientific scrutiny. Despite the quasi-vaccines achieving negative efficacy and coverage correlating with all-cause mortality, immune compromise and adverse events are being denied. Aided and abetted by conflicted journals and media, health officials have politicized and corrupted science and eroded regulatory standards. To protect against future pandemics, confidence and scientific integrity must be restored by health officials submitting to direct questioning in open, transparent debate. Thank you.
It is clear to me that the World Health Organization has been captured by external agencies masquerading as being humanitarian. This would include, inter alia, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and pharmaceutical companies who have scientists funded by them and who are also in control of World Health Organization policy formulation. These scientists are thus massively conflicted in their interests. Thus, in my opinion, the World Health Organization is no longer a humanitarian organization, but a profiteering dumping ground for untried and untested pharmaceuticals, especially with respect to lack of long-term peer-reviewed safety data unleashed upon the world under politically controlled emergency use authorization, in complete conflict with the Nuremberg Protocols and the Declaration of Helsinki. This has never been more apparent than in the vilification and disregard, even criminalization of doctors and scientists who, as doctors, inter alia, the Frontline COVID-19 Critical Care Alliance in the US and the British Ivermectin Research Development, speak out openly against the media onslaught orchestrated by these agencies alluded to above, or anyone who holds opposing views to the mainstream media narratives funded by the very organizations who, in my opinion, have captured the World Health Organization.
The language employed in the draft of the Pandemic Treaty, also known as CAII. The provisions of this WHO CAII shall in no way affect the right of parties to enter bilateral or multilateral instruments, provided that such instruments do not conflict with their obligations under the WHO CAII. In other words, the CA will overrule pre-existing legislation, and this is in denial of state sovereignty. Quote, the central role of WHO on pandemic prevention, preparedness and response as the directing and coordinating authority on international health work, but this is too generic. Quote, states are expected to provide oversight of and report on laboratories that do work to genetically alter organisms in order to increase pathogenicity and transmissibility. This is gain-of-function research, which is outlawed in many countries. USA Professor Francis Boyle declared that the Wuhan BSL-4 laboratory is also designated as a WHO research laboratory, and BSL-3 and BSL-4 laboratory must be banned to prevent catastrophe. This constitutes an unresolvable conflict of authority. Stop the WHO and provide banking system and let the sovereign state regain control over public health policies and their own budgets and debts.
Hi, my name is Anna Osmola White. I am a mother of 2 boys. To protect the people from the future pandemic, we should promote and support immunity. Come back to pandemic definition from the year 2003, where a pandemic is having high mortality in all age groups and severe course. The level of infection should remain insignificant as it was in the past. To look for the effective drugs that are already in use. Do not recommend lockdowns, social distancing, and wearing masks for the people that are healthy. Countries should be able to take independent decisions about the health of the nation in the face of the pandemic. I do not agree with WHO as the one global institution to tell all the world what to do. Locally, we act better in crisis. I would expect that every action of the World Health Organization is aimed at ensuring respect for human rights for the free choice of treatment methods. Also, deciding to take or not to take vaccination should be our basic right. Thank you.
I do not believe this should be mandated at the international level. This would assume that every country has a similar level of healthcare. They're very different, and therefore the needs are very different by country, so should not be mandated by an international body. During the past pandemic, we were told that the World Health Organization was just following the science, but later we learned that science was not followed and is still not being followed in many cases. Our understanding of this pandemic, for example, has changed much, and we're much clearer now on what it should be. But we're still using old science solutions. Makes no sense. I also believe that our doctor-patient relationship needs to be respected, and this cannot be done by an international group. So therefore, I am against any international invention in our country's healthcare system. Thank you for allowing me to share.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Agnieszka Wołoczko. I represent the organization from Poland called Teachers for Freedom. I'd like to express my disapproval against the attempts to consider the superior role of WHO over national laws of individual countries in the treaty. This institution is mostly subsidized by private companies and can only serve the advisory role. Each person is responsible for his own body and well-being, especially when it comes to vaccination. Moreover, it is only the person vaccinated who suffers the consequences of vaccination. It is neither the state nor the doctor or employer who takes responsibility for the side effects or deaths of people vaccinated. People got persuaded to get vaccinated without the elementary knowledge of the side effects or the fact that the product was in the experimental phase. The measures taken to fight the disease weren't effective or based on medical evidence. People had to recover at homes without access to hospitals or medical examination. That's anti-human. No to WHO. No to the treaty. Thank you very much.
Protection against future pandemics at the international level occurs with accountability in communication. Overarching mandates cannot account for individuality of different nations. The WHO's failure to adequately gather information from the Chinese Communist Party regarding the coronavirus outbreak led to reactive responses from various nations who could have otherwise responded proactively to limit transmission of the virus. The lockdowns that the WHO recommended for children and healthy individuals were strictly in opposition to the organization's stated purpose of promoting health, as the deleterious and far-reaching effects are now demonstrating. The WHO has failed the world during the COVID pandemic. Increasing the budget and governing power of this international organization will not change that, but will further handicap individual nations from taking appropriate actions. No legally binding actions need to be created by the WHO, as there is no appropriate level of world government that can adequately serve individuals around the world. Better protection against future pandemics occurs when individual nations maintain open communication with each other rather than suppression by regimes regarding outbreaks.
My name is Tamara Lashchuk, and I'm a citizen of the United States of America. I'd like to thank the World Health Organization for giving us this opportunity and allowing us to express our opinion on how we would like to see your involvement in future pandemic responses. First, I would like to see the deconsolidation of authority and power on all pandemic matters away from the World Health Organization and back into the hands of the citizens of the world. Secondly, I would like to see the World Health Organization completely defunded and dismantled. And I would like to see the organization and its members investigated for their involvement in both the release of the COVID-19 pandemic as well as the vaccine program. I would also like to see a tribunal that tries you all for crimes against humanity. To be clear, I will never consent to give you power, authority, and discretion over any issues regarding my medical freedom, my medical decision-making, or any of my healthcare for me and my family. Thank you.
To better protect against future pandemics, we need to invest in the world's most trusted profession, nursing. Policymakers and global institutions need to involve nurses and citizens in these conversations, in these rooms, and at the tables where these conversations take place. Show us inclusivity. We have seen the leaders in the pantsuits. I want to see the nurse who just worked a 16-hour shift and wasn't able to take a break. The one who's been reusing PPE for weeks. I want to hear her voice. Nurses played a huge role in the discoveries made throughout this pandemic. We were at the bedside, in the room, maintaining a line of oxygen to a healthcare system which would have quickly crashed without this profession. As nurses, we don't just treat diseases and illnesses, we treat people too. I want global leaders to come and meet these people, step into the communities that you serve, and invest time in speaking to these individuals that keep our communities and homes running. Nurses have invested themselves in caring for others throughout a pandemic that is still ongoing. Nurses have invested in us, and it's time for us to invest in them. Thank you.
Switzerland's largest economic organization, the Swiss Federation of Small and Medium Enterprises, sees decentralized and inclusive approaches as key to the management of pandemics. A decentralized approach encourages each country, and within the country its subdivisions, to use different sets of instruments, leading to a heterogeneous framework. The more differentiated these diverse instruments are applied, the better they can accommodate local and different ways of life. They also trigger a learning process by comparing how each set is deployed and their results. An inclusive approach develops instruments for the management of the pandemic bottom up, in dialogue with all stakeholders, allowing each stakeholder group a maximum of autonomy and responsibility, especially in the implementation of the instruments to deal with the pandemic. With a decentralized and inclusive approach, there is little need for a global or regional coordination.
My name is Isabella Mazur. The independence of a nation must be maintained, and an open and uncensored dialogue must take place with the respect of citizens and doctors who are submit critical comment not in line with what is present by Buha or sponsored like there by pharmaceutical companies. I ask you to reinstate the version of the definition of a pandemic as having high mortality in all age groups on several causes. The level of infection should remain in insufficient as it was in the past. I'm asking also for public access to all activities and agreements signed by WHO and in pointing out that the management of Hadley should be in the hands of representatives of independent country, not pharmaceutical companies. Lockdown should be independent decision of countries. And 92nd, to present arguments of Polish and all people is harming the honor of citizens of an independent country.
My name is Claire Payne. I'm an Australian medical journalist and the editor of Clarity on Health. I speak also for my husband Ralph, a mechanical engineer interested in complex systems and governance. Here are 5 learning points from the handling of the pandemic. First, countries must be free to choose their own responses. In our large complex system of people, centralized global control would link the elements of the system too closely together, leading to what Charles Perrow called system accidents. Moreover, if a pathogen is novel, the best way to deal with it is unknown. Allowing a variety of responses improves the chances of finding effective approaches. Second, trusted principles of medical ethics must always be upheld. Many states and employers mandated the vaccinations. This was coercive. Third, information released by governments and the WHO must be transparent, referenced, quantified where possible, and continually updated. A disease that causes death should always be put into context with reference to the number of deaths per day from all causes. Fourth, free speech about ways to tackle a pandemic must be welcomed. The processes of science and democracy depend on it. During the pandemic, there was widespread censorship. Fifth, governance systems must constrain conflicts of interest. There must be a clear separation of powers between the FDA, the pharmaceutical companies, and governments. Treatment approaches during the pandemic were overwhelmingly medicines under patent.
As a student of traditional Chinese medicine, I'm convinced that it should be used for pandemic control and that its use in clinical treatment of COVID-19 will make a major contribution.
Ivana Adamczyk. All future pandemics should eliminate errors which appeared during COVID-19 that caused hardship and deterioration in various areas of life. In hindsight, the remedy was in fact more dangerous than the disease. Online medical consultations should be banned. Hospitals should be opened for all patients, not just COVID patients. In Poland, over 200,000 people died because they didn't have access to medical care. Doctors and patients should have the right to choose methods of treatment. WHO doesn't allow this, which goes against the Hippocratic Oath and results in doctors losing the right to perform their job. WHO should suppress conflict of interest with pharmaceutical companies. Medical decisions should be supported by scientific evidence. Debates with doctors of different opinions should be allowed. Vaccines in trials shouldn't be recommended as short and long-term reactions are unknown. Open Verse documented over 40,000 deaths after COVID-19 vaccines only in the USA. During lockdown, there was a sharp rise in suicides. No more lockdown, no censorship, no to the treaty, no to WHO.
Over the recent coronavirus, many decisions were made regarding vaccinations, some with good reasoning and some without. Many scientists were listened to, but many were silenced, and we are now looking at untold damage by vaccinations and lockdowns. Even the CEO of Pfizer is trying to distance himself from the safety failings, and this is alarming. Firstly, it's important as a World Health Organization to recognize who your biggest funders are. If they have an ulterior motive, understand what that is. Is it to protect humanity, or is it personal gain? Secondly, I really hope with hindsight you can now see that you cannot prevent a pandemic. The vaccinations fail to prevent coronavirus spreading, and the lockdowns fail to prevent it too. With this knowledge, please don't make the same mistakes again. By all means, seek to provide protection to the most vulnerable in our societies, but with fully tested science. An emergency cannot be an excuse to use untested new-style vaccinations. Surely you know that now. Thirdly, you must know that our own immunity is incredibly powerful if it has not already been compromised by existing medical conditions. It should be allowed to deal with the pandemics naturally. You are a valuable body to the world in advice and the advice that you give. But if you cannot be trusted because you're being steered by your biggest fund providers, what value to the world are you?
Dear WHO, my name is Del Bigtree, and I'm the host of the internet talk show The High Wire, which is now seen by millions of people around the world. Throughout the last 2 years of the pandemic, I've been interviewing world-renowned scientists that have been refuting all the recommendations made by you, the WHO. Things like masks, which have proven to not have any effect on the COVID transmission, in fact, causing health problems and mental problems for our children around the world. Or how about social distancing, a random idea of standing 6 feet apart, which has no basis in science and also has shown no effect in stopping COVID around the world. But worst of all, let's talk about the lockdowns, the destruction of jobs and lives all around the world, economies crashing through the floor, rising homelessness, and now a hunger crisis that is screaming around the world. All of this while we were supposed to be waiting for the great COVID-19 vaccine, the mRNA technology that you said would end this pandemic forever. It did not do that. In fact, it couldn't stop infections at all. And now at 4 and 5 boosters around the world, we're starting to recognize a different problem, a rise in excess mortality that cannot be explained after the COVID pandemic. So when we are being asked by you to make recommendations on what we think the WHO should do, I say, get back to what you're good at. I have no idea what that is. It's not in stopping a pandemic. It's not in creating a successful vaccine. So when it comes to your pandemic treaty, I say no.
Hello, my name is Janina Hajuma, gynecologist from Romania. During these 2 years, there were abuses hidden under the guise of science. Since 2010, the definition of the pandemic no longer contains the criterion of seriousness of the infectious disease. WHO made recommendations for wearing masks, distancing, treatments, vaccines. These recommendations have led to many abuses. The diagnosis of COVID disease were decided by a positive test, even in the absence of symptoms. Effective treatments with ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine have been denied. It has been argued that the only solution is conditionally approved gene therapies, misnamed vaccines. In 2021, the definition of the vaccine was changed to fit the products. In addition, through psychological methods of persuasion and pressure exposed in articles on PubMed, a large part of the population of the planet has been injected with these products approved after mock studies. This action destroyed the trust of a population in doctors and medicine. Many doctors were censored. By this method, we now have excess mortality. In Romania, there was an excess mortality in 2020 of 14%, and in 2021 of 28%, of which approximately 50% were non-COVID deaths. Therefore, I believe that each country should decide its own response to pandemics, depending on its own particularities.
PH Doctors Beata Wrodycka-Żytkowska. I am speaking on behalf of Polish Independent Physicians and Scientists Society. Effective future pandemics protection requires the following. Emphasis to prophylaxis, meaning psychosomatic conditions using vitamin D3 and glutathione. Original 2003 pandemic definitions is to be reinstated when not the infectivity but the mortality is the criteria. During pandemic, the experienced practitioners should be experts. They have to conflict of interest free. During pandemic, the recommended therapeutics have to be selected from already known therapeutics. The WHO recommendation of PCR test has to be abandoned since it doesn't detect the effective SARS-CoV-2 infection. In case of the new pandemic, no lockdowns, no social distancing, and no face masks are to be enforced to healthy individuals since such methods are scientifically proven ineffective. The new therapeutics have to be managed and pulled off from the market if more than 50 fatalities worldwide occurred. All the WHO actions have to keep in mind the human rights protection and patients' freedom of choice. Thank you.
Dustin Bryce, interestofjustice.org. Interest of Justice experience in the declared COVID-19 pandemic was a loss of health from unnecessary limitations on rights not strictly required by the exigencies of the situation. Ordinary administrative measures and treatments were always available to treat COVID-19, but were not utilized in order to declare the pandemic. The treaty is intended to redefine pandemic, despite the word being already defined in customary law. The WHO concedes that a pandemic cannot be controlled. Therefore, if the WHO were to try to better prevent future pandemics, they would not only be going against the unequivocal rules of science, they would be going against their previous COVID-19 declaration of pandemic, where the WHO confessed that a pandemic cannot be controlled. To protect health in the future, there should be no centralized international level healthcare system, and blanket measures are presumed disproportionate on their face. To respect the sovereignty of each country, as well as meet the WHO's obligations to the IHR Article 3, Section 4, control and management of the pandemics should be left in each individual nation to handle in the way that their sovereign legislators intended in their own regulations. The WHO unilaterally lowered the bar for the word pandemic by omitting the one essential element required by the common law, which is the essential element of the great danger to life or high mortality rate. The WHO's definition of pandemic wrongfully allows for the imposition of measures merely because of an apprehension of potential danger, violating Article 54 of the Syracuse Principles. Resolving this breach of WHO's obligations must be addressed before any pandemic treaty is drafted. Thank you so much.
Based on my experience with the COVID-19 pandemic in New Zealand, I see several things that need to be improved by the World Health Organization to better protect people against pandemics. Firstly, do not advise segregationist and exclusionary policy. It is a fact that the vaccine passports only led to division and had absolutely no efficacy in slowing or stopping COVID-19 or the spread of CoV-2. Do not recommend isolating families from each other. This has riven our society and led to the greatest division we have had in New Zealand in decades. Secondly, never intimate to world governments that they should mandate unproven vaccines. Well before the vaccine was rolled out, it was clear that it had been hurried and had not been adequately trialled. Also, the mandates have further led to divisions in our society and are ineffectual. The vaccines are now showing themselves to be more harmful than preventative, and the statistical data shows that they have been ineffective at best and clearly are linked with many adverse effects. Both vaccine and mask mandates have done damage to our society that may take years to repair. Masks now litter our streets after we've only just removed single-serve plastic bags from society.
My name is Agata Rabsztyn. I represent the NGO Podkarpackie Stowarzyszenie Wolni Jasło.
and act in accordance to the Article 63 of the Constitution of Poland. I would like to draw attention to the fact that the treaty in its currently negotiated form cannot be adopted, as its provisions allow pharmaceutical companies to generate unlimited profits and give the possibility to introduce total digital control over citizens. We ask for a return to the definition of a pandemic as a disease with a high mortality rate and an exceptionally severe course. High contagiousness should not be taken into account, as has been the case in the past. Each country should decide how they manage healthcare. Central control by the WHO is unacceptable, as it violates the independence and self-determination of individual countries. Experts, such as doctors and scientists who present research and opinions that differ from the official WHO's position, should be fully listened to. Citizens should have access to full information on WHO's contracts, and pharmaceutical companies should not be allowed to withhold any records concerning their products or services. Thank you.
My name is Jolanta Lebetiu, and I am acting as the individual voice of my country, Poland. Regardless, I'm living for more than a decade in United Kingdom. For both countries and any other, this is the time to act. According to Article 63 of the Constitution of the Republic of Polish Citizens, I'm pointing out that the negotiated treaty may open dangerous opportunities for introducing total digital control for societies and unlimited profits for pharmaceutical companies. I'm asking to reinstate the version of the definition of the pandemic as having high mortality in all age groups and severe course. The level of infection should remain insignificant, and it was in the past. I'm asking also for public access to all activities and agreements signed by WHO. With no doubt, management of health should be in hands of representatives of independent countries, not pharmaceutical companies. The independence of all nations must be maintained, and an open and uncensored dialogue must take place with the respect of citizens and doctors who are submit critical comments, not in line with what is presented by WHO, sponsored largely by pharmaceutical companies. Lockdown should be independent decision of countries. And at the end, I just want to point out that
According to the Article 63 of the Constitution of the Republic of Poland, I think that the negotiated treaty may open up dangerous opportunities for introducing total digital control for societies and unlimited profits for pharmaceutical companies. I'm asking to reinstate the version of the definition of a pandemic as having high mortality in all age groups and severe course. The level of infections should remain insignificant as it was in the past. I'm asking also for public access to all activities and agreements signed by WHO, and is pointing out that the management of health should be in hands of representatives of independent countries, not pharmaceutical companies. The independence of all nations must be maintained, and an open and uncensored dialogue must take place with the respect of citizens and doctors who are submit critical comments, not in line with what is presented by WHO, sponsored largely by pharmaceutical companies. Lockdowns should be independent decisions of countries.
My name is Anna Skwarek, and I am the citizen of Poland. According to Article 63 of the Constitution of the Republic of Poland, hereby, on behalf of Polish citizens, I am pointing out that the negotiated treaty may open up dangerous opportunities for introducing total digital control for societies and unlimited profits for pharmaceutical companies. I am asking to reinstate the version of the definition of a pandemic as having high mortality in all age groups and severe course. The level of infection should remain insignificant, as it was in the past. I am also asking for public access to all activities and agreements signed by WHO, and I am pointing out that the management of health should be in hands of representatives of independent countries, not pharmaceutical companies. The independence of all nations must be maintained, and an open and uncensored dialogue must take place with the respect of all the citizens and doctors. Lockdowns should be independent decisions of countries. Moreover, I am pointing out that maximum 90 seconds to present arguments of Polish people is harming the honor of citizens of an independent country. Thank you.
My name is Leszek Pikula. I'm acting as an individual citizen of Poland and UK resident. According to the Article 63 of the Constitution of the Republic of Poland, hereby I'm pointing out that the negotiated treaty may open up dangerous opportunities for introducing total digital control for societies and unlimited profits for pharmaceutical companies. I'm asking to reinstate the version of the definition of a pandemic as having high mortality in all age groups and severe cause. The level of infections should remain insignificant as it was in the past. I'm asking also for public access to all activities and agreements signed by WHO and pointing out that the management of health should be in hands of representatives of independent countries, not pharmaceutical companies. The independence of all nations must be maintained, and an open and uncensored dialogue must take place with the respect of citizens and doctors who submit critical comments. Not in line with what is presented by WHO, sponsored largely by pharmaceutical companies. Lockdowns should be independent decision of countries. I'm pointing out that maximum 90 seconds to present the arguments of Polish people harms the honor of citizens of independent country. Thank you.
Olá, muito bom dia.
Hello, good morning, or good afternoon, or good night. I don't know at what time you will watch this video, but I'm here to talk very briefly about indigenous medicine. Indigenous medicine is very important for people's health, especially for us indigenous people who live here in the village. I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Yuri Magno. I'm from the Saturi Mawe people, and I want to talk to you about indigenous medicine, the importance of indigenous medicine in our lives. I am one of the producers of indigenous medicine, making medicines with medicinal plants. It is a tradition that I've received from my ancestors, my grandparents, shamans, and our leader. And today, I continue with indigenous medicine. I'm very proud to say that indigenous medicine also cures. We need to advertise it and talk about it. Put indigenous medicine on television networks, in newspapers. I think that would be a very great joy. And I would also be very happy if indigenous medicine could be provided at the pharmacy of a hospital. However, until today, and I'm 45 years old, I still haven't been able to do that. But who knows, with your help, we may be able to push forward indigenous medicine beyond where it is now, because this medicine is very important to us.
So Yolanda Makushi.
My name is Yolanda Makushi. I'm from the indigenous land called Raposa Serra do Sol. I work with indigenous traditional medicine of the Makushi people. During the pandemic, working with traditional medicine, we were able to treat several people and to provide treatment to patients who needed our help. We developed an anti-inflammatory and expectorant syrup to treat COVID-19, the disease itself, and post-COVID, as we are aware about the long-term effects of COVID. We were able to treat this disease with traditional medicine. All indigenous peoples here in Roraima have used medicinal plants. We have been spreading the work of traditional medicine to the whole region through audio messages. We have concluded our work, we have overcome the pandemic, and now we are still here doing our job with traditional medicine. We thank all of those who have taken part in this endeavor, treating our Indigenous and non-Indigenous brothers.
Is a disaster for mental health, for businesses, and we should never go through that again and give power up that easily unless it is under control.
Hello, I am Dr. Siddharth Agarwal from Faculty of Integrated Medicine at Dalbagh Educational Institute, Dalbagh, Agra, India. To prevent future pandemics like COVID-19, the healthcare habitat has to be developed on lines of sustainable development goals. In this regard, I will share my experience during COVID-19 pandemic with particular reference about the association of dysregulated glucose metabolism and adrenaline hypersecretion under stressful conditions with the resultant diversion of glycolysis to anaerobic pathway with increased production of lactate and high levels of LDH, IL-6 and ferritin in COVID-19 patients. The progression of viral flu-like illness to severe acute respiratory illness as in COVID-19 is preventable if the key player glucose and stress level is taken care of. And measures are to avoid prolonged fasting and stressful conditions which stimulates release of adrenaline, steroid hormones and hyperglycemia, causing activation of the inflammatory pathways. Future interventions on controlling the impact of lifestyle disorders like diabetes, hypertension, obesity, major stress disorders, and cancers on the propagation of infectious pandemics such as COVID-19 will be sustainable and will create an ideal healthcare habitat. I conclude that research be further continued along the sustainable development goal lines will be prepared the ground for improving the global health and further prevention of such devastating pandemics by controlling the non-communicable disorders like diabetes, obesity, heart disease, and controlling adrenal levels. Thank you.
My name is Rosie Cornell. I live in Western Australia. There should be no pandemic treaty. Sovereign nations must have the right to choose how to respond to an international crisis. As the COVID-19 pandemic showed, too many decisions were made by bureaucrats in places far removed from countries where significant harm occurred, and decisions were driven by political ideology and financial considerations. Before declaring a state of emergency, governments must consider the Syracuse principles. Future pandemic responses must ensure no measures intended to mitigate against the spread of disease abrogate human rights, whether written in law or not. Bodily autonomy and the right to work are the primary considerations for any government response in the future. There cannot be any derogation of our non-derogable rights. No existing treatment can be made illegal to assist the introduction of an experimental drug that has undergone no long-term testing of human subjects. And a treaty cannot allow a foreign government or entity to enter a country and enforce pandemic measures. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Mira Forst van Hefter, and I'm a fellow of the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, and I'm a student doing a Master's in One Health. In my opinion, the World Health Organization should only ever be an advisory body. Any pandemic response should only provide advice on contagion and prevention, early treatment options, and general reassurance rather than fear. Scientific debate should be safeguarded, and no level of censorship should be allowed. The past few years have taught us that government interventions, not based on established pandemic plans, cause tremendous harm at individual and societal level. Never again should the World Health Organization or governments be able to override the rights of the individuals to self-determination. Lockdowns, masks, coerced and mandated vaccination all flew in the face of established science. If proper scientific debate had been allowed, the outcome of this pandemic would have been much better. So to recap, the World Health Organization should only ever be an advisory body, and advice should be based on scientific debate and adjusted based on any developing data. Public health should be about reassurance rather than fear, and providing people with the tools to make informed consent about their lives. Thank you very much.
Based on your experience with the COVID-19 pandemic, what do you believe should be addressed at the international level to better protect against future pandemics? In my view, there were several issues with the response to COVID at the international level. These must be addressed. Number one, ineffective solutions. Lockdowns were not an effective solution. They've been shown to have had little positive impact on protecting people from COVID. Number two, mandated medical interventions. The use of mandates internationally has reduced the ability for informed individuals to make their own decisions about medical treatment. This has reduced trust in both governments and the influence of international bodies such as the WHO on sovereign nations. Number three, unnecessary risk. An honest indication of the dangers and effectiveness of the experimental gene therapy vaccines must be acknowledged and clearly communicated to those who are considering taking one of them. A willingness to recognise the correlation between the vaccine rollout and young healthy people who have died suddenly is crucial. The risk factors associated with the vaccines are becoming increasingly apparent. Number four, the influence of international bodies. The WHO should have no power or control over independent sovereign nations' response to any pandemic. The pandemic treaty cannot go ahead.
There is increasing realisation that the response to COVID has been excessive and that collateral damage is likely to way exceed that of COVID. This damage includes the impact on general healthcare, where in the UK there are an additional 90,000 deaths whilst on the waiting list in 2021 compared to pre-COVID times, which is more than the COVID-related deaths for that year. On cancer screening, which is set to elevate cancer deaths for years to come, a real ticking time bomb, and on general health treatments causing unnecessary suffering to millions of people. The effect of the measures such as lockdown on the young who are at very low risk of COVID was huge and has resulted in thousands of additional suicides, depression, lost job opportunities and so on, due to the lives of our young people being on hold for no personal benefit. Entirely unfair. We should be protecting the young more than we should be protecting the elderly. They are the future. Then there is a massive financial damage which will have long-term health and well-being implications for us all. If there is a lesson to be learnt, it is that overreaction to a problem can be worse than no reaction or underreaction. This is common sense. We need more common sense to see the bigger picture in future with less of a knee-jerk reaction to the inevitable future pandemics. This is what I hope the international community can consider in the future.
Traditional Chinese medicine has made an outstanding contribution from the outset of the pandemic and has played an important role both in prevention and treatment. TCM, in its history of epidemic control, accumulated abundant experience. Clinical data clearly shows that TCM is effective in reducing severe illness and death rates. Traditional medicine could help if used in global response. I hope TCM can make a greater contribution to the world.
I believe the WHO should have very limited involvement in future pandemics. There should not be a one-size-fits-all approach in pandemics. In COVID, we ultimately saw the best approach is the sharing of ideas and data from real-life application. The community of researchers, scientists, and doctors need to be able to openly present and examine data, methods, and outcomes. There should not be top-down control by the WHO, but a bottom-up approach where first-hand practitioners share their results and how they can provide care for patients to meet their individual needs. The primary function of the WHO should be to provide accurate data about disease trends. They should provide an open forum for uncensored sharing of data. The use of existing medications for immediate treatment needs to be discussed. Thank you.
I do not believe that there is any international body, including the WHO or the UN, that has any authority over our sovereign nation as the USA or any of its U.S. citizens, whether they live in the United States or live abroad. Therefore, I do not believe that either one of these organizations should be making or stating policies to be followed by countries. It is well within their purview to make statements or recommendations or to share information as long as it is accurate and can be substantiated by third parties. Therefore, there is no response required, in my opinion, by the WHO or the UN other than to disseminate information, and they have no authority to state policies or to force countries to maintain their policies.
Hello, my name is Coco. I'm a doctor of traditional Chinese medicine in Canada. I think that everyone should help each other operate, especially when it comes to promoting traditional Chinese medicine. I am TCM medicine doctor in Canada. When the pandemic broke out, I experienced firsthand how effective traditional medicine is in preventing and treating COVID-19. Hope people can let go divisive political biases and recognize the active role that traditional Chinese medicine can play in treating coronaviruses. TCM has huge advantages over a single uniform antiviral treatment because it is individualized, knowing that treatment is on a case-by-case basis and holistic approach. I hope WHO can advance global awareness and guidance on the benefits of traditional Chinese medicine, whether during the current pandemic or during potential future ones. Thank you.
In case of new pandemic, I believe that medical professionals should be trained with all the existing knowledge, scientific data about the virus in circulation, after which each country must organize its fight against the pandemic according to the specific health programs carried out in that country. The imposition of forced measures leads to their rejection by the population and to the failure of action to combat the pandemic. Thank you.
Future crises. Thank you.
Distinguished participants, I am Daniel Dorado with Corporate Accountability. We respectfully address several issues which we do not see addressed despite several requests for attention on the matter. First, developing of a strong and comprehensive accountability framework. It is alarming how the pharmaceutical and other industries have seemingly added billions to their profits during the pandemic, which concerning trends of tobacco corporations' ownership of pharmaceutical companies to develop and distribute COVID-19 vaccines, potentially legitimizing their voice during the negotiations. Second, alignment of the process with accountability precedents. Taking lessons from the WHO FCTC on conflict of interest, liability, participation of non-governmental and other members of civil society not affiliated with the tobacco industry, and also from the legally binding instrument on business and human rights, can be instrumental in developing a comprehensive accountability infrastructure to protect the pandemic treaty from the long-documented and dangerous trend of corporate capture and its impact on life and livelihoods. Such precedents are built upon accountability principles, which mutatis mutandis should guide the requisite provisions that IMB and WHO must adopt to advance people-centered solutions to protect us from future pandemics. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for allowing me to share my thoughts. A number of things about the response to the pandemic were deeply concerning to me. Top among those concerns is the way in which doctors were censored, doctors, nurses, other healthcare providers, as well as scientists. It's my belief that they should be able to speak candidly about what it is that they're observing among their patient population or what they're seeing in data that they collect from research studies without fear of being censored, threatened to have their medical license removed, or without fear of being fired from their employment. The vaccine mandates were troubling to me. Of particular concern was the fact that at the time that the vaccines were mandated, the ingredients of the vaccines were not known, nor was the data from the safety trials of the pharmaceutical companies who developed the vaccines released to the public. I think it would have been nice had the public been informed, for example, that in Pfizer's clinical safety trials, there were over 9 pages of serious adverse events, including over 1,000 deaths. It doesn't seem to me that informed consent can truly be informed consent if, one, the vaccine is mandated as a precondition of retaining one's employment, or two, the person doesn't know to what it is that they are consenting. Thank you again for allowing me to share my thoughts.
In the event of a future pandemic, I suggest the following measures. Helpful instruction. Fear-mongering is toxic, forges unfavorable outcomes, and destroys society and actually reduces immunity. Number 2, promote overall health boosting now. Educating populations to socialize, exercise, eat healthily, build community. This builds immunity, reducing need for further interventions. Number 3, accept that death is inevitable. Fear of death concept is unrealistic and toxic. Number 4, promote community and communication. Solutions will be shared and save lives. Number 5, empower community to support each other. And number 6, above all else, uphold free will. Thank you.
We'd like to see transparency placed at the core of all future pandemic preparedness and response mechanisms. Transparency builds trust and allows for more equitable and efficient responses to pandemics. Specifically, we'd like to see greater transparency in 3 key areas. Number 1, in research and clinical trials. Timeframes for the publication of clinical trials data and study reports need to be defined in order to allow for findings to be effectively analysed and minimise the risk of undue influence and manipulation in development processes. Secondly, in procurement, where transparency requirements, including open contracting, beneficial ownership registers, and audits, need to be built into response frameworks in order to reduce corruption risks. We'd also like to see measures put in place to ensure the full publication within 90 days of contracts for purchase of medical products. Thirdly, in the development of mechanisms to safeguard equitable access, including the establishment of a global medicines pricing database to allow countries to report prices paid for medicines in order to reduce global pricing disparities. We'd like to see greater use of pooled procurement approaches being made in order to get better economies of scale and enhance equitable access. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to provide comments from the OECD. Measures to slow the spread of the virus in the early stage of the COVID-19 pandemic had the desired effects in most countries. However, the control measures introduced had unintended health consequences, including delays on the provision of routine healthcare and raising levels of mental health issues. The indirect economic consequences were huge and ultimately may cause more death than the virus itself through the adverse impacts on people's well-being. The OECD calls for the international instrument to include the requirement to assess the wider health and socioeconomic consequences of pandemics and pandemic control measures. The OECD also calls to develop better decision-making tools to help countries through very complex decisions on how to maintain the lives of people as well as sustain their livelihoods. The OECD would be very happy to contribute to work in this regard. Thank you very much.
First, sovereign nations should govern their healthcare of their people and not international organizations. Further, healthcare has always been between an individual and their healthcare provider and based on informed consent and information. What organized healthcare institutions did during COVID was remove the basic rights of individuals to make informed decisions. The collaboration of international organizations like yours with governments and institutions to limit speech, opinion, and debate and control the narrative is wrong. It looks coercive and it has damaged people's trust in healthcare. I had a specialized case for my daughter where I believe she shouldn't be receiving the adult dose of vaccination, being just over the age limit. And size and weight I felt wasn't appropriate. And I had no option to determine a better path for our family with my primary healthcare provider in regards to vaccination. Our doctor refused to entertain a solution that fit my child's specific needs in regards to the risk versus reward ratio of receiving the vaccination, citing that she couldn't prescribe the children's dose due to legal reasons. That has nothing to do with my daughter's health at all, and instead everything to do with my healthcare provider's legal liability to follow the directives of people who had no knowledge of our specific situation, and that includes organizations like yours and how they advise.
I believe that pandemic decisions should be basically made at the local and country level. This is something that relates to the health and life of a human being for a special geographical area. So basically we are all different in all continents and all countries. We have a different immune systems. We have a different, let's say, well-being behavior, and basically we also differently respond to some illnesses and viruses. So I think that this is up to the local governance to decide whether we should be limited or somehow secured by some additional activities, in terms of in terms of general safety. So I hope this will be probably always made on a local level, as this is the right way to go.
我认为在国际方面应该多加强和其他国家的合作。
In particular, as someone working in traditional Chinese medicine, I have seen many patients who use a combination of traditional herbal medicine, acupuncture, and moxibustion in their treatment with excellent results. So I think traditional Chinese medicine should be considered as a valid treatment option and not some kind of alternative medicine.
My name is Rafał Bułgajewski. According to Article 63 of the Constitution of the Republic of Poland, I would like to point out that the negotiated treaty may open up dangerous opportunities for introduction total digital control for societies and unlimited profits for pharmaceutical companies. I'm asking to reinstate the version of the definition of a pandemic as having high mortality in all age groups and severe cause. The level of infection should remain insignificant as it was in the past. I'm asking also for public access to all activities and agreements signed by WHO, and is pointing out that the management of health should be in hands of representatives of independent countries, not pharmaceutical companies. The independence of all nations must be maintained, and an open and uncensored dialogue must take place with the respect of citizens and doctors who are submit critical comments, not in line with what is presented by WHO, sponsored largely by pharmaceutical companies. Lockdowns should be independent decisions of countries. I would like to point out that maximum 90 seconds to present arguments of Polish people is harming the honor of citizens of the independent country.
Hello, my name is Ondine Sherwood, and I'm representing the charity Long COVID SOS. We believe that in order to better protect against future pandemics, we must learn lessons from this one. It's clear that the level of morbidity caused by SARS-CoV-2 was unexpected and not foreseen in pre-pandemic planning. Although health systems rose to the challenge of coping with acute infection, in the early days, those who managed their illness in the community were ignored, and their health status was not subject to any surveillance or investigation. As a result, little was known about those who failed to recover within the anticipated 2 weeks. Since medical professionals were unprepared for patients presenting with ongoing illness, those who went to their doctors for help were met with confusion and often disbelief. Huge numbers of patients, many of whom were experiencing debilitating symptoms, were turned away and told that they were suffering from anxiety. It cannot be overstated how profoundly not being believed has contributed to the trauma endured by those with what is now known as long COVID or post-COVID condition. Many describe it as one of the worst aspects of their illness experience. Having to advocate for themselves and fight for recognition only increased their suffering. Health systems need to be resourced to enable them to prepare for the possibility of mass chronic ill health. There should be ethically approved research protocols in all countries that can be rapidly deployed so that ongoing illness can be tracked and investigated, as well as strategies in place to prevent people from developing chronic illness and to support those suffering. People worldwide living with this life-changing condition still struggle to get medical care.
My name is Roman Fritz, and I'm acting as member of board of Polskie Veto Foundation. According to Article 63 of the Constitution of the Republic of Poland, hereby the Foundation on behalf of Polish citizens is pointing out that the negotiated treaty may open up dangerous opportunities for introducing total digital control for societies and unlimited profits for pharmaceutical companies. Such a dangerous international agreement would harm the Polish Constitution, mainly Article 31.3. The Foundation is asking to reinstate the version of the definition of a pandemic as having high mortality in all age groups and severe course. The level of infection should remain insignificant as it was in the past. The Foundation is asking also for public access to all activities and agreements signed by WHO, and is pointing out that the management of health should be in hands of representatives of independent countries, not pharmaceutical companies. The independence of all nations must be maintained. An open and uncensored dialogue must take place with the respect of citizens and doctors who are submitting critical comments not in line with what is represented by WHO, sponsored largely by pharmaceutical companies. Lockdowns should be independent decisions of particular countries. The Foundation is pointing out that maximum 90 seconds to present all important statements and conclusions of Polish people is harming the honor of citizens of our independent country. Thank you very much.
My name is Patrice Pedersen, and I'm the president of the First Freedom Foundation. This is me after midnight on a Sunday. The scope of your question is quite narrow, but the scope of this treaty is extremely broad. So if you pandemics, I am going to speak about pandemics of arbitrary detention, pandemics of censorship, and pandemics of social isolation. My husband and I didn't mind staying in because we were trying to conceive, but we should have been free to choose whether or not to send my stepdaughter to school, attend church, and our friends' funerals. The World Health Organization's own constitution defines health as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease. So if you want to prevent the next pandemic of human rights violations, stop prioritizing disease over every other aspect of life. Stop providing cover for dictators, and stop stealing power from the people it belongs to.
Good morning. My opinion is that there's no need to implement nothing new. For example, a pandemic treaty or other thing like that, because every country, also those from third world, like Africa, Asia, or something like that, since we are living in the age of the internet and the communication, international communication, also those countries that could have not information or also maybe instruments can have it in a shortened time. In case of a new pandemic, every country must follow suggestion by on-field physician doctors. I mean, those that works in the hospitals or that are in direct contact with the patients, and scientists free of any conflict of interest. There's no need of global surveillance. There's the need of transparency, democracy, and respect of the rule of law. Respect for human being, respect for individual, inalienable rights. Thank you.
WHO should act as a conduit for sharing information between countries,
but should not seek to dictate policy, which is the responsibility of democratically elected governments. WHO should act as a resource where different pandemic plans and evidence-based guidelines can be shared, and should continue providing accurate international data. The optimal management of a pandemic is far from clear, and individual countries are best placed to plan for their own populations, allowing for demographic differences and health priorities. In the recent COVID-19 pandemic, an attempt to standardise management across the world has led to mistakes being replicated. For example, early treatment with repurposed, readily available drugs could have reduced hospital admissions and potentially saved many lives, yet these drugs were widely banned and censored. It is vital that any plans should have a proper risk-benefit analysis. This must include wider societal harms from non-pharmaceutical interventions, such as lockdowns, which disproportionately impact the poor. All-cause mortality must be a primary outcome measure for any new drug or vaccine, with properly organised prospective monitoring for adverse events. It is vital that the WHO maintains integrity and its funding is freed from any influence of the pharmaceutical industry. Thank you.
My name is Mary Little, and I live in a very rural area of the United States. The pandemic did not have the same effect in this small part of the world as it did in the larger cities. Because of this, I clearly see the benefit of not allowing world control over individual lives. The WHO should only be a suggesting body and not a ruling body. Dictating what countries of the world should do is an infringement on personal sovereignty. The WHO's job is one of a repository of information. Personal sovereignty must be maintained. Thank you.
Before 2020, we already had well worked out strategies for pandemics. There are two examples in the transcript. These initiatives were based on extensive public consultation and in both cases prioritized the continuation of normal social functions over an exclusive focus on eliminating a virus. The purpose of one of the examples, an extensive citizens' voices on pandemic flu choices consultation in the US, was to develop an improved plan for pandemic influenza that would be likely to receive public support. The rationale for this was based on three premises. That the formulation of vaccine policies, which involve consideration of values as well as science, requires that policymakers understand the range of society's values on those issues, that the process which will best reflect society's values is public engagement, which involves both stakeholders, including experts and citizens, and that an inclusive public process which provides for an opportunity for frank, open dialogue and careful deliberation will produce sounder, more supportable decisions in the long term. The World Health Organization may have a role in this by providing evidence, but it is not for the WHO to impose its members' values on the rest of the world.
See four basic principles which must be always followed by WHO when dealing with any pandemic situation. Number one, no binding character. Nothing, no policy, no document of WHO must in any way bind the countries, and no country shall be sanctioned in any way by not following the opinion of WHO. Number two, there must be no conflict of interest on the side of experts or representatives of WHO, and if there is any similar possible conflict of interest, it must be clearly declared to the public. Number three, no politics. WHO must remain non-political expert platform. Number four, no censorship. WHO must never censor any opinion. The decision-making and any recommendation must be based on broad discussion. WHO must always protect physical, mental, and social well-being of humankind, and above all, our children. Thank you.
Hola, soy William Sánchez.
Hello, I'm William Sanchez Vega, a lawyer from the Republic of Ecuador in South America. I'm a legal advisor to the Citizen Commission for Truth and the Life and Sovereignty Collective. To WHO's question about what needs to be addressed internationally to better protect against future pandemics, I would say that since it is a property of RNA viruses to form antibodies, we should promote inoculation with blood serum from recovered patients, because all over the world, this is a safe and undeniably effective treatment with proven decades-long immunizing capacity. No attention should be paid to pseudo-vaccines in the experimental stage that merely serve the interests of certain companies. We now see that these cause more harm than good. Autopsies should not be prohibited, as this only breeds ignorance. I suggest that we should look after the air we breathe, especially in closed places involving mass gatherings, by sanitizing ventilation systems in public and private buildings at least every 90 days. Finally, scientific debate must be thrown open without excluding non-official views.
My name is Werner Mayer. I'm hailing from Switzerland and live since 42 years in India. For 20 years, I worked mainly on my spiritual development, and now I'm also helping others who are on the same path. I have a few suggestions for you. Leave the sovereignty to the nations. You have no right to take control or how they deal with the situation. If you want to give advice, let it be the exact opposite of what you did so far. No lockdowns. They don't prevent the spread of the virus, but they destroy people's lives. No vaccines. They don't prevent infections, but are extremely destructive for health, even lethal. No mask mandate. Wearing masks does not protect from viruses, but is unhealthy because of the accumulation of bacteria and psychologically depressing, especially for children. No social distancing. The only effect it has is to estrange people from one another, destroying the basics of social life. So, for heaven's sakes, care for people instead of destroying their health and livelihood, and thereby give more wealth and more power to the corporation and the super rich. In short, become human again and work for the well-being of humanity, as you are supposed to do. What you did in the last years is a crime against humanity.
In the event of a new pandemic, I believe that the experiences of each country regarding the successes or failures of the various measures taken in accordance with the health programs of each country should be made known in the due time, so that all other countries can benefit from the experience in the field. This is about real transparency regarding the measures taken with good results, and not the imposition of measures proven ineffective, even if they have been recommended by the OMS, World Health Organization. There are measures that can be applied uniformly, but must be adapted to the specifics of each country. Each country should be left free to apply its health policies in accordance with its national specificities and experience in the field. No international body should interfere with effective national policies in order to forcefully implement a series of general measures not adapted to the medical, social, and educational specificities of each country. Thank you.
Hello. As a pharmacist with more than 25 years of experience in community, hospital, and oncology practice, I've witnessed numerous problems and limitations related to allopathic medicine and see the need for alternative forms of therapy. Please do not suppress the patient's rights nor the physician's rights and abilities by their training to practice within their respective fields. It's unethical. Medications typically take 5 to 10 years for proper clinical testing before being brought to market. Speed kills. Many medications have been pulled from the market or have had black spot warnings added to their monographs even after the regulations have been followed. The mandates and lockdowns have and continue to cause devastating and ongoing socioeconomic consequences. Isolation of the sick, not the healthy, has been and should continue to be paramount in any pandemic protocol. Recognize natural immunity and permit the healthy to carry on with their daily lives as normal. Thank you. The only way to truly prevent future pandemics is to change the way we interact with livestock and wild animals. When animals are living in cramped, dirty, inhumane conditions, standing in their own urine, feces, and blood, they can spread disease to humans entrusted with their care. Livestock should live free-range and grass-fed without hormones or antibiotics unless absolutely needed for a serious infection. They should be slaughtered safely and cleanly according to kosher and halal laws. The best defense for all humans is to make sure our bodies, the host terrain, are uber healthy by eating fresh or frozen organic and non-GMO produce, grass-fed free-range animal products, and canned, bottled, or packaged foods without additives, preservatives, or high fructose sugars. Living an active lifestyle, getting fresh air and sunshine are essential. For those living in northern regions, supplementing with vitamin D is important. These steps are the best defense against germs. There are natural holistic remedies, herbs, teas, and essential oils that can be antidotes or alleviate symptoms. We can protect our home, work, and public spaces with UV filtration on our HVAC systems and windows that open to allow for fresh air. In our homes, we can remove our shoes at the door to prevent tracking microbes on the bottom of our shoes onto our floors. In all spaces, we can regularly clean floors and surfaces. Rather than international dictates to health, we need a decentralized regional response to health that addresses the needs of the people living in their own communities. No lockdowns, passports, masks, vaccines, or social distancing ever again.
My name is Karen Bracken. I represent no organization. The WHO wants to know what they can do or what we can do internationally to stop all future pandemics from occurring. The solution is very simple. Number one, end all gain-of-function research globally and immediately. Number two, shut down all BSL-4 laboratories globally and immediately. Number three, and the most important one of all, shut down the WHO, the CDC, the FDA, HHS, the NIH, and the United Nations. If you notice a pandemic treaty, which will hand more power to the WHO and is not one of the recommendations, a pandemic treaty is not a solution for future pandemics. If you are not willing to take these steps, then you are really not interested in stopping future pandemics.
My name is Mike Homestead, and I speak for myself. I appreciate the WHO's invitation for people like myself to leave a comment on pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response. And my comment is this: I don't believe that the WHO is a credible organization to dictate any response. At best, the WHO might make recommendations, but even recommendations from the WHO might be interpreted as sound expert advice. But if the COVID pandemic taught us anything, it's that the pandemic response was far more political than scientific. And because of these recommendations, nations were forcing untested, unapproved, and ultimately unsafe jabs on its citizens. Employers and other organizations also made political decisions based on recommendations to force jabs on their employees with the threat of termination if they refused. And now we are finding that the death rate in some of the most vaccinated countries are far in excess of just the previous year when we were supposedly still in a pandemic. And with young people dying in their sleep, athletes passing out and dying on the field of play, who knows what's still yet to come? The WHO has no credibility and therefore should have no role whatsoever in advising or dictating a future pandemic response.
My name is Joanna Mazur. I am a teacher and a member of the Association of Teachers and Educational Workers, Teachers for Freedom from Poland. The last 2 years of the pandemic declared by WHO have been a very difficult time for children and young people around the world who were forced to stay at home due to the lockdown. Closed schools, a lack of contact with peers, teachers, educators, and school psychologists, spending up to 12 hours in front of a computer resulted in the increase in addiction to the internet and computer games, isolation, depression, increased obesity rates, spine and eye disorders. In Poland, the number of suicidal behaviors among children and adolescents increased dramatically during the pandemic. The lockdown and other restrictions introduced by WHO did a lot of harm to all the people in my country. WHO is not a democratically elected body, so it has no right to make decisions for sovereign nations. The self-proclaimed body has no right to make decisions for us without our consent. No to the pandemic, no to the treaty, no to WHO.
My name is Roguski. According to the Article 63 of the Constitution of the Republic of Poland, I, on behalf of Polish citizens, I am pointing out that negotiation treaty may open up to dangerous opportunities for introducing the total judicial control for societies and unlimited profits for pharmaceutical companies. I am asking to reinstate the version of definition of pandemic as having high mortality in all age groups and severe cause. I am asking also for public access to all activities and agreements signed by WHO, and I am pointing out that management of health should be in hands of representatives of should be in hands in independent countries, not pharmaceutical companies. Lockdown should be independent decision of countries.